Good morning, good morning. Welcome to a new year. Welcome to 2021. I know we are all excited to start out a new year, as every single year we kick it off, but after 2020 and the craziness of 2020, we are more than happy to have a new wonderful year, and I thank all of our students for all of your business during 2020. I congratulate all of our customers for the great business they had in 2020. And here we are with a new year, new possibilities, new goals. And we get to start it off with a brand new researcher from the Research Center at A&M University, and this morning you're going to get to hear the 2021 Economic Update by Dr. Adam Perdue. And he, as you know, has moved to the Research Center in 2020, or you may not have known that, but our Dr. Gaines retired. We knew he was going to be retiring in 2020, and sent us a wonderful new speaker that I will formally introduce in just a few minutes. But first of all, I want to say to all of our campuses, North Dallas and Plano, Fort Worth, most definitely Austin, where they had 5 inches of snow this week, and then San Antonio, our 3 wonderful campuses in Houston. Houston North will be open. We absolutely believe in a couple of days. We are so ready for our students right at the 99 Grand Parkway at Kirkendall, next to Memorial Hermann Hospital. And it's ready for you. We are good to go. And then we have our beautiful West Campus at Highway 6. And then our wonderful Galleria campus at 610 and the Loop. So most definitely virtual classes kept us going full speed ahead in 2020. Our virtual classes were amazing with people. They said, where has this been? Please don't take it away after the pandemic. And we're like, no, we've had virtual classroom that you can take at home with a teacher since 2016. You all just discovered it this last year when you needed to do that. And we also, of course, have online. And we have all of these different delivery methods for you, our customer, our new student, whether it's real estate, loan, appraisal, inspection, business etiquette, we have it for you. And a shout out to our managers who have been incredible, our teachers that have been the most amazing over the last 12 months, just teaching away from home, teaching away from wherever we needed them to be. A thank you to our president, Kimberly Didelowitz, who offices in Plano, our VP, Kurt Knobloch in Austin, Debbie Blazes, VP in our Houston North campus. So thank you, students. And without further ado, I will introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Adam Perdue. Dr. Perdue is an amazing educator in economics. He actually has 4 degrees. That blew me away. Good morning, Dr. Perdue. How are you?
Good morning, everybody. I'm doing very well. We also had about 6 inches of snow here in Bryan. And as a native and lifelong Houstonian, I was fundamentally and totally unprepared for this.
know when we were going to practice and meet each other on Monday, he said, I am not ready for 6 inches of snow on the ground. And he is from Houston. He actually was born and raised in Galveston County. He frankly lived in Friendswood and married. Both he and his wife have an interest in soccer when I'm assuming a few years back. And he was actually a soccer, not a soccer coach, but a soccer referee, correct?
Well, actually, I was a coach when I was younger too. But no, my first job starting in junior high was as a soccer referee, and I carried that through as a side job all the way through college.
Well, those degrees that you have, he has a bachelor's in civil engineering and environmental engineering, and then he worked a couple of years in San Antonio, came back to University of Houston, where he received all 4 degrees, and got his master's in economics, and then went forward, got his PhD in economics. That truly blows me away to have all of that education. I know you have a niche for what's happening with our urban cities in Texas. And I know that niche, and that you were involved with the Institute for Regional Forecasting that got you the position with our wonderful research center at Texas A&M University. And I believe, isn't the research center part of the Mays Business School?
Yes, ma'am. We sit with the Mays Business School. So it's great being here on campus. We have access to all these academics in the business school and the economics department and the planning department here at Texas A&M. But yeah, we sit with the business school.
So just overall, what and how did the real estate economics change during the pandemic in 2020? Just your view from your perspective as an economist.
Completely unexpectedly. We have weekly meetings here among the research team. And so of course, the end of February and the beginning of March, the COVID and the possible spread of COVID back then was the top discussion for every single week. And so we were talking at that point in time about shutdowns in a large part of the economy. Even if the government hadn't explicitly shut it down, if people were worried about going out, and even without the government shutdown, we would have seen much of what we ended up seeing.
Do you expect to see the robust market that we had? And what month did you see at the research center that it really just went bam, full speed ahead?
So March and April were incredibly low, and we started to see recovery in May. And then by the time we get to the summer months, we really saw performance year over year increase greatly. And so then it was really the summer months that just kind of caught everybody by surprise. And I'll cover why, now knowing what we know now, why that happened. But it was really the summer months allowed us to catch back up, and we've erased the losses in the single family home real estate market that we saw in March and April.
You know, agents did virtual showings with Skype, with FaceTime. We had virtual closings, well, not virtual, well, virtual, yes, with Zoom. And we totally sold properties without buyers not even having seen them in person. And not just saying that happened randomly, that happened like consistently. Mm-hmm. And it worked really well. In your opinion, do you think when the pandemic is over, and we know and believe it's going to be over one of these days and we all get our vaccine, but do you think that this way of doing business virtually will continue? What is your opinion on that?
I mean, basically it's a tool we've had kind of like what you talked about with your virtual classes. You've been offering them virtual classes, I think you said, since 2016. And it's a tool we've had. And I think what is really going to happen is that people will have learned about it and have gotten comfortable with it. And so going forward, it will definitely happen more than what we saw in 2019. But so with my move, I bought my house in. I've been buying and selling houses. Bought my house here in Bryan and sold my house in Houston. And so personally, and I think a large part of the market uh, will go back to wanting to actually see the house that they're about to put however many hundreds of thousands of dollars down on. But what is going to happen, it will be a larger part of, it will be a shift change. It will be a larger part of the market now that people understand and have gotten, been forced to get used or comfortable with the idea. But I think we'll see definitely a retrenchment back to, once we can, I think most people will still want to do everything live.
So curiously, did you buy your house sight unseen? Did you do it on FaceTime?
No, ma'am. So like, I bought my house in December of 2019, well before.
Okay, before the pandemic.
But my house, I wasn't able to sell my house in Houston. I think I closed on the first week of May. But as far as I know, the person who bought my house did everything live. We drove into Houston to do our closing. I forget exactly with which title company, but over there in the Galleria area. So our transaction was, as far as I know, still
it was on face-to-face traditional.
To the house and see the house.
So from your view, with all of the data that you see and analyze in your department regularly, give us your overall impression of how our commercial group did, commercial real estate during the pandemic, and how it is today.
So commercial, so apartments have seen in Texas, right? I mean, in Texas, apartments have seen a little bit of an increase in vacancy. Offices the same, but so like apartments is really easy to talk about because it's got 1-year leases and you get a lot of churn, so you expect to see almost immediate impacts in as much as it's going to be any kind of immediate impact. And I expect like a lot of the vacancy rates that we've seen an increase is new apartments continue to hit the ground, and they just haven't been filling up as fast. Offices are going to take office and retail and those other commercial space are going to take a little bit longer to shake out to see exactly where they're going to end up. So there's a big question about increases in work from home. And even if everybody doesn't start working from home, maybe 10% of the office doesn't go in every day, and so you need a little bit less space. But that's going to take a little while longer to shake out and see exactly what the long-term and medium-term impacts are going to be.
So, Dr. Perdue, we hear rumors that possibly we have a land shortage, a shortage for development of residential homes. What is your opinion on that?
So there definitely has been a land shortage, and it's really that that's not really a new thing. That's been going on ever since some of the regulations that passed after the Great Recession back in 2010. They increased the loan to value ratios. They made financing land for development much more expensive. And so then that's been that's been a thing that's going on for about 10 years now. And basically the problem is it's going to be a reset. We increase the cost of land development kind of in a big chunk wholesale. And so then I think that a lot of the real estate markets in Texas are just kind of going to end up resetting, and unfortunately to a higher price and a slower pace of development.
Well, before we get into the wonderful slides that you brought forward today, and by the way, all of our licensees in Texas are able to access these slides. I know that's one of the reasons that we have about 800 to 1,000 viewers today is they get to hear from a wonderful, credible PhD at the Research Center what we can expect. And at the same time, we can go online and pull down the slides and use in our presentation manuals so that we're not giving our opinion, but we're giving the opinion from these smart PhDs at A&M University and the Research Center. But just quickly, tell us, if you would, with all of our major metros in Texas, is there one metro that has risen above the rest, that's doing appreciably better in production than any other of our Texas metropolitan areas? What is your opinion on that?
Production, right? Houston is, putting lots on the ground and getting new houses has always been Houston that allows building and new construction by and far. But if we were talking more about performance over 2021, and just Austin has overperformed in the real estate market in as much as you're talking about price appreciation, number of houses exchanged and traded, and basically, I think they're down now to 0.6 months of supply on the market. And if it keeps going the way it's going, we're going to find out if it's technically possible to have negative months of supply. I'm not sure how that would work, but Austin's going to test that limit.
We've never had that before. Very exciting. I don't want to steal any of your thunder by asking you all of these questions that are high on my list out of curiosity. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Perdue, and you take it from here with your slides and just show us what's going on in our awesome Texas.
All right. All right. Well, I really want to thank Rita and the Champion School of Real Estate for having me here. Just 100% wish it was in person. We like going out and giving these presentations to everybody across the state, and it's not necessarily just out of the goodness of our heart. We like talking to everybody, and we, the realtors, once you really become our ears to the ground and help us know what's going on, more specifically within your neighborhoods and what you're actually seeing in real time. So I really wish we could be doing this in person, but I'm glad been given this opportunity. And so I hope you find this incredibly informative, and you're always welcome to reach out to the Real Estate Center if you have any further questions going forward. So, so of course, right, I didn't put it on this slide, right? But of course, when we're looking back, the real story is, 100% about COVID. Right. But when that translates to how we've, impact on the real estate markets, right? There's some smaller things like we've already discussed where people have shifted to virtual learning and stuff like that. But the big impact that it has, right, can be boiled down in the economic term to what has happened to employment in the state of Texas and in our major metro areas, right? And so then who has lost jobs? It's actually going to be key. We've seen incredible variance in industries and the workers and occupations that have been incredibly impacted versus some other occupations and industries that have, this is just a small little recession for them. And then also we'll get into, we've seen it slightly different, where exactly the impacts have fallen the hardest. So we can look at our different metros and we can talk about, what are the major employment opportunities you see in each one of those metros, or, in across the state. But like Austin is tourism and the state government and tech. San Antonio is the federal government with the military and a little bit of finance with the USAA and Frost out there, and definitely tourism. Houston is trade and oil employment, and then and Dallas, for the last of the major metros that we'll talk about today, right, is kind of like the corporate headquarters for the state of Texas. And they've also been picking up some tech and some IT jobs and stuff like that. And so when we see recessions, a lot of times it's a key point to talk about when we're talking about Texas and the areas in Texas is exactly where it got hit, what industries and what occupations got hit the most by the recession. And then and that kind of translates so that, like West Texas is getting hit hard by the loss in oil and gas. Houston is getting hit hard by the loss in oil and gas. We would have expected Austin and San Antonio to get hit hard by the loss of tourism. That's going to turn out to not be so much. And then another thing that's happened this time that has just been kind of out of bounds, and is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I was discussing about what we really missed, is the Fed's responses, the Federal Reserve, sorry, I'm going to shorten that to Fed from now on. The Federal Reserve's responses to what would have otherwise been an even worse economic catastrophe has led to mortgage rates falling dramatically. And that's going to be the big driver that we're going to see. And we'll touch on it again later in helping the market recover, the single family real estate market recover so quickly and more than recover, and actually come up well above what we saw last year. Although it actually will turn out in a second that at the beginning of this year, we would have forecast a incredibly great year for Texas real estate. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to go into what we've actually seen happen in 2020 in the single family real estate markets across Texas, across the Texas metropolitan areas, and in our four major metropolitan areas. And I forgot one data point here, one bullet point. We'll go into a forecast for our real estate market. So Texas as a whole lost something around 20% of its employment immediately in April. And has now recovered a large bulk of that and is now down about 4.5%. I mean, and this is just incredibly drastic. We've never seen a kind of loss that quickly in 1 month and 2 months, as we saw this time around. This is what led, even here at the center, we were pretty doom and gloom and this is what we were focusing on, and we missed the mortgage rates changing. And then this slide here kind of breaks that down. It's going to show us the different industries. So in green is all non-farm in the state of Texas. And so that right now, as of November, we are down 4.37%. Our employment is down 4.37% from what we saw in February, which is kind of, as a rule of thumb, kind of like the peak month for employment across all the industries in the state of Texas. The Federal Reserve, or actually the National Bureau of Economic Research, said that the peak was reached sometime in February, but the nature of the data collection shows our peak being in February. And we can see here the key points that we would look at here are there are two industries across the state of Texas that never lost jobs. All right, and that was federal government employment, large role, so the government is always relatively stable, and especially federal government, so this wasn't unexpected. And then also the census data collection and everything helped it grow over this time period. So it never lost jobs. The peak month was February, and it's gained 4% of its jobs. Finance and insurance, it's a similar story. And this is both the mortgages, right? And so that one thing we've seen, so I've been watching it, trying to refinance my house because rates fell so low. But as soon as rates started falling, right, banks got backlogged on their mortgage applications. And we can see that today, continues today. That is why they have a spread between their refinance rate and their new origination mortgage rate. Because they just got incredibly backlogged and they find new mortgages more valuable than people refinancing. And so they never lost employment. Plus, a lot of the government response and the PPP loans and all small business administration loans and et cetera were worked through the finance, through the banks. And so they have been able to maintain their employment and have actually increased their employment by 4%. Our biggest losers in employment have been leisure and hospitality, which I mean, most everybody has been talking about. These are all the people that are working that would have been working in restaurants that have been closed, in hotels that are no longer seeing people traveling and needing their rooms, and et cetera. So they lost 40% of the jobs that they had in February by April. And they have been on a recovery mode and they've gained 2/3 of those jobs back, but they're still down 14%. And then mining and logging has been the final industry that has seen significant losses. Um, and so that they ended up losing 20% of their jobs between February and August. And they've gained 6% of those back, but it's still a loss of 18%. And oil so it's called mining and logging, but here in the state of Texas, we're really just talking about oil and gas. Um, when we look at these numbers, right? We still have logging out there in East Texas, but they haven't been as strongly impacted. And just sheer absolute numbers, it's really oil and gas. And they were actually trending down even before COVID. But as soon as everybody stopped flying and stopped driving for long distance travel, the oil industry just got doubly hammered from the losses that we were already seeing at the beginning of this year. Um, and so they're down 18%. So the leisure and hospitality leads us to expect, that's kind of a general industry. Everybody got hotels, but we would have expected, and it's going to not be borne out, that San Antonio and Austin should have been a little bit worse performing relative to the other major metros because of this loss and their tourism focus. And then mining and logging, oil and gas, right, is going to be, we expect Houston, which will be borne out in our later data, to be the biggest, the most impacted, as well as Midland and Odessa. I'm not going to cover Midland and Odessa specifically through here, but they have been hit despite the growth that we're seeing everywhere else in the state of Texas year over year. Midland and Odessa on prices and transaction volume are actually kind of running. They lost in March and April, and then after that, in their recovery, they've just been running flat. And so then relative to the rest of the state, that means they're losing ground. And so then this is kind of like a normal slide that a lot of people will use, but it's a little bit hard. All right, this is our major metros. When we use absolute numbers like this, and when you'll see in a lot of places, it's really hard to see. That doesn't really look like much happened. And so then, right, you can definitely see for Dallas and Houston that there was a dip. It's not really very visible for Austin and San Antonio. So instead, I'm going to use some slightly different metrics and ways of looking at these numbers throughout my presentation. The first here, I will show the index of metro employment. If we set February employment levels for the metropolitan areas at 1 in February, and then show how they changed, what percentage loss and then gain back they've had. This is what we call an index, and it's what we can see here. Pretty much all 4 of our major metros and the state of Texas lost about 10 to 11% of their employment from February through April. And then they've been recovering ever since. and you can see here the gray line is Houston has been recovering the least, because it's not only everything that you hear about all the time if you're in the rest of the state of Texas, with just bars and restaurants and hotels being shut down, but professional workers being able to continue to work. Houston has seen its professional workers also hit in the oil and gas industry. And so then they've had the weakest and slowest recovery. Making this chart has actually told me that I need to investigate what exactly is going on in Austin, because they've seen the strongest recovery after seeing the strongest loss. And our normal easy stories that are just always sitting in the back of the minds of people like me don't really fit. And hopefully next time I'll be able to tell you what exactly was going on in Austin. And there's a lot of theories that when I sit around with the one other economist that's actually coming into the office still, that we can come, but they're kind of a mixed, just so story. But anyways, the main point here is everybody lost a lot of jobs, and they recovered most of their employment, except for Houston. And Austin has really seen the best recovery out of our four major metros. So this is unemployment, and I went ahead and pulled in, a long enough time frame so that we can talk a little bit more about what's been going on in Texas versus the United States. So before 2016 and 17, and that was kind of the oil bust after the 2014. But before that, Texas was absolutely outperforming the rest of the United States. And then we saw our oil bust that started at the end of 14. And, there were a lot of doom and gloom stories, but it merely meant that we were performing as well as the rest of the United States. And our employment rates were still significantly lower than we'd ever really seen previous to this last cycle. So we were doing really, really, really good. And then COVID. So then I shortened that same unemployment rate, Texas versus the United States. Texas did not get hit as hard as the rest of the United States. And some of that is, the differential policies that different states in the union underwent. But, people like to blame it a little bit too much on the government shutdown. Even without an explicit policy of shutting down, people would have stopped traveling. People would have stopped going to hotels. People would have not gone out to restaurants as much. So we would have seen something like this, government policy or not. And then we can also see that Texas recovered much more quickly. And then as of right now, the last data point we have here, Texas is slightly above the United States on unemployment rate. But a big part of that is that the labor force participation rate in the state of Texas has recovered much more quickly. And then a lot of this is demographics. We are a young state relative to the rest of the United States. And then young people are neither as threatened by COVID or care as much about it, right? Are willing to take their risk. So people, we exited the labor market when everybody was incredibly scared in March and April. And our younger population has entered the labor market much more quickly. And so in the short term, this is a decent metric. A lot of people like to use it in the long term to say some stuff that's not really true. But it's a pretty good metric on the short term to see why we are getting as variations in employment rate across different locations. And then here we see unemployment rate by our metro. So Austin, right, we saw that the employment recovered much more quickly in Austin. And so then its unemployment rate has ended up being about 1 percentage point less than the other central cities, Fort Worth, Dallas, and San Antonio. And Houston is faring a little bit worse. And this is because of the impact of oil and gas job losses being focused in Houston. Okay. So then our expected impacts, right? So we've had a major loss of jobs, right? And it's focused on demographics. So one key that I didn't point out back when we were in that earlier slide, for the rest of the state, but besides Houston, a large part of the losses in employment are focused on waiters and bartenders and hotel staff. And so for these other areas other than Houston, these are workers and individuals who generally are not participating as buyers in the homeowner occupied segment of the single family real estate market. So since they weren't, that basically means that as an economic impact, we don't really see, despite that 20% loss in employment for those people, it doesn't have a very strong impact on the single family homeowner purchase transactions, prices, and stuff like that. That is our losses in apartments, and it's going to end up being losses in some single family rentals and stuff like that. But it's not going to directly impact a lot of the single family purchasing market. But then we would expect to see, because of the focus in oil and gas, we would expect to see, say, Houston and Midland and Odessa to be performing a little bit worse than the rest of the state when we look at the single family homeowner market. And so then this is kind of what we missed that when we were pretty doom and gloom in March. The Fed's responses to the economic catastrophe that was sparked by COVID has been charitably put unprecedented. And so that they've been flooding the market to provide liquidity to the market. And so that basically means, to some extent, recessions aren't necessarily, sometimes they're triggered because we put our capital into unproductive uses. And so like a key one, a recession that was like this was the recession we had back in 2000 and 2001. When everybody, the pet.com and all these, at the time, kind of ridiculous internet businesses. And then actually what really drove that recession was the massive overinvestment in a lot of the infrastructure behind the internet, right? So we saw what WorldCom and it's slipping my mind, but one of the old phone companies, I want to call it MCI or MTI or something like that. They just put ridiculous amounts of investments in infrastructure supporting the internet. And it turns out that was maybe not super productive at that point in time. And so that's kind of like the natural theory of a recession. And if it's unproductive, we kind of want it to go away. But sometimes we get recessions where it's just this liquidity crisis. And people are, productive firms and companies, they're making money. People made money in 2019, and then something happened, and they just no longer can get a loan, even though they were a productive company. And so then that's called a liquidity crisis. And pretty much the only way to try to solve one of those is to just flood the market with liquidity. And so, like if you think about this, if you had the money and you were going to be and you were thinking about loaning it out to somebody, would you necessarily care that the restaurant failed in 2020 if it was making money hand over fist in 2019? No. And there's a lot of stuff that's like that. And so then the Fed just kind of pumped money into the market to try to keep these illiquid but not insolvent companies viable. And so what we have seen is interest rates fall from about 3.5 or 3.75% for my specific example to about 2.5% today. And so then we've already discussed my house purchase. So in December of 2019, I was able to get a mortgage rate from Chase Bank at 3.75%. Today, Chase claims to be offering rates as low as 2.5% for 30-year mortgages. And so then I just went ahead and in Excel, right? This is just the basic Excel table, the payment formula and the present value formula. So that if you had your initial mortgage was $100,000, then your principal and interest payment at 3.75% would have been $463 a month. That same payment at 2.5% would allow you to buy a house or allow you to take on a mortgage of $117,000. And so, and then, which means that basically with rates at 2.5% instead of 3.75, everybody's purchasing power, if you are still in the home buyer market, is 17% greater. And so that's why we got to make the distinction between who lost their job. The people that are typically in the home buying market haven't seen a very large loss of an employment. They still have their jobs. But what they've seen instead is a 17% increase in their purchasing power. So before they were on the bubble, they would say, $350,000 is a little bit too much to pay for this house because my payment is going to be, or so let's go ahead and use 500,000, right? 500,000 is a little bit too much to pay for this house or apartment because then my payment is going to be $2,300 a month. But now I can pay I can get a bigger house. I can get $80,000 worth more of a house for that same payment. So I can get more house. Or if you look at it the other way, right, I can get the same house and it's actually going to be a payment of, let's say, $2,000, right? And that makes it much more competitive against their apartment rent or their rent that they're paying. And so what we've seen is this massive tranche of people who were on the bubble between buying or continuing to rent, who all of a sudden it makes sense for. And or we have people that were thinking about buying anyways, and now they can afford to pay a little bit more, right? Which is what is going to end up happening a little bit because we're not making new houses this quickly. Or they can buy a slightly better house, and that pushes them over even more quickly. And so then, right, economically, this is what explains the performance that we're going to show in the single family market this year. Your typical buyer has not, we've only lost 2 to 4% of those. And the remainder that haven't lost their job have seen their purchasing power go up by 17%. And so then, on a rough equity, right, if we look at those comparisons, then we might have expected in March, if we had known how far rates were going to go, we might have expected what we are going to end up seeing. So here's another way that I've changed the numbers up a little bit. Normally when you show this chart of closed listings year over year, it's incredibly seasonal, right? And so all you would normally see is a series of 5 hills and 5 valleys. And so a much better way to look at this is to show the year over year growth. And so that what we can see then when we look at this is how the market is changing. So if we look back here for our 4 major metros, and then this total MSA is all the metropolitan areas in the state of Texas, the unweighted average across those metropolitan areas. So that from 2016 to December, to January of this year, or actually November of last year, typically our closed listings grew about 10% a year, which is not unexpected. As fast as the state of Texas was growing, as fast as home buying population was growing, right? We had this secondary baby boom in the millennials who are entering in the time period in life in which people normally buy a house. And as fast as our incomes were growing, so 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10% a year, it makes sense. And then also you can see here, at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2018, it starts jumping up, right? And so now we're in between the 10 to 20% of the year. And this is what I kind of reference to say that at the beginning of the year, we were already forecasting that this year was going to be a very good year. And for the reasons that I had already said, millennials, we have a demographic bulge entering into their typical home buying years, and incomes are going up. Houses were getting put on the ground. Permits were finally starting to catch up, and starts were finally starting to catch up to what we had seen back in the real estate bubble of 2006. So 2020 should have been a pretty good year if there hadn't been COVID or some other financial or some other recession started by something else. And then what we saw instead was an absolute collapse in March, April, and May in the closings. And so then this is kind of another part. Everybody was uncertain. Everybody was scared. We didn't know what was going to happen. But everything started to shake out starting in end of May and in June. And so then our year over year growth rebounded starting in the summer and then just continued to grow. We're closing on more and more houses. It's growing faster and faster relative to what we had seen in the previous year. But then we're constrained, right? The builders are starting to permit. Actually, we'll show you a permits for the state of Texas later, and it really doesn't even show a pause. But with this increase in 17% purchasing power, and builders cannot, even as fast as our guys go, cannot just snap their fingers and have a house on the ground. In the very short term, supply is relatively constrained. And then this massive increase in purchasing power essentially means the prices are going to skyrocket. And so then we've seen Austin has reached 20% year over year. And if you look back in history, right, Texas and Houston and the major metros had been pretty much bouncing around 3%, which is just barely above inflation, right? But and again, and it's always kind of explained by the demographic bulge, increasing income, increasing number of people, the growth of our cities, and stuff like that. And so we've seen massive increases in prices in the face of the short-term inability of builders to snap their fingers and get these new houses on the ground with this increase in purchasing power. Let's see. Oh yeah, one keynote, right? Like so, San Antonio never really saw a negative price, right? So part of that is their federal government basis. So the federal government is always very stable, and so we pretty much always expect San Antonio to be relatively more stable than our other major metros. Part of that increase in price, though, is also explained by the changes in people who are still buying. All right. So, it's not enough that people haven't, that certain people haven't lost their job. You also have to be relatively secure in this idea that you're going to keep your job through the rest of this crisis, which is continuing. And so then what we've seen is that people are not only buying, there's some evidence that it's the highest end of the market that is also helping drive price growth, right? It's the higher end of the market that is staying in the market. And so we've seen pretty rapid growth, much larger than what we've seen. But since buying started back up, the median square feet for all our metros has been above 2% year over year house. So we're buying bigger houses, which explains part of that price growth. So then if we take into account that larger houses, the price growth per square foot is not nearly as extreme as just the absolute price growth. And so then what we've seen, again, this is the idea, a lot of people are actually staying. Listings fall off and never really, new listings each month kind of fell off and never really covered as much as the buying did. And so then our active listings, all of our markets are becoming incredibly tight relative to where we would have expected them to be in a slightly more normal market. We expected something a little bit like this. And you can even see this, right? With our growth in 2019, we were already seeing kind of a fall off in active listings in our major markets through 2019. And then the 2020 just accelerated this trend, and I'll show you later, and brought us down to kind of the ridiculous numbers like what we're going to see in Austin of approximately 0.6 months, I think, is the latest. And so here we can see, right, this is the new listing. Austin has recovered on and grown since the recovery on new listings each month. But whereas the rest of the major metros in Texas as a whole is actually kind of, people are staying put. if you're not buying, there's some segment of the market that's really looking for a new house, but if you already have a house, those people are kind of staying put, right? Why go through, right, with the instability and the insecurity? I'm going to kind of stay put, and I'm going to refinance, right? Is what we've seen for a lot of these people in Houston and Texas as a whole, and in Dallas, Fort Worth, and in San Antonio. But the prices have gone up so much in Austin that it's starting to really encourage people to list their house. And so then this closings year to date. And so, right, this is so this kind of looks at, the whole sum of what we've seen throughout the year up to that month. And so then this is also the evidence. January was a ridiculously good year for closing. I mean, very good month for closings relative to what we saw in January 2019, as was February and March, right? And then our absolute collapse in closings in April and May pulled it down, right? So then, while we have caught up on the year to date, we may not have caught up to where we might have been if 2020 hadn't been if 2020 hadn't been such a roller coaster of a year. So then this is going back to this is what I was saying about when we just show absolute values, right? You normally just kind of see a bunch of hills, 5-year hills and 5 valleys in a row. We have a seasonal function. Average prices are typically higher in the summer just because more people are shopping, and also the types of houses. More people are shopping for large suburban homes because they're thinking about their kids and their future and school districts and et cetera and et cetera. But even on that idea, right, for 2020, you can actually see we've kind of gotten rid of that hill for 2020. Prices have continued to go up, and they haven't seen their normal seasonal falls as we entered the winter and the late fall months. But these are the absolute terms. So just to show, I wanted to show how much Austin has gotten up and where everybody actually is. And then absolute terms for a month's inventory. Again, right, normally, right, we just see hills and valleys, and it always kind of looks like a straight line, a straight trend line, unless you actually have a good trend line in there. But just basically the lack of listings and the absolute number of closings have pulled months inventory down in all of our major metro areas, well below anything that we would have expected to see. And this is helping to continue the price growth across Texas and in the major metro areas. And so our builders, right, we finally have got back to the area of, in 2006, this number of permits was over building. It was, so like my neighborhood that I lived in in 2006 and 2007 turned out to all be houses for Californians to buy as investment homes. And I know that because after the bust, they all went, like about half of them went into foreclosure. They weren't homeowners occupied. I did some investigation in Harris County Appraisal District, and it was all being built for Californians because they thought $100,000 for a house was ridiculously cheap, which it is relative to California, but wasn't for that time period in Houston. Since then, we've added probably 3 or 4 million people in Houston. We have in Texas. We have large amounts of growth. And so this permitting is much more fundamentally sound. And actually, right, you can see the dip there for March and April, but actually with all the noise and looking at the history there, it looks like it's just been kind of a continuing trend for the state of Texas and didn't really even miss a beat, except for one noisy month in there. And so then the builders are trying, they're getting, and they are constrained by the availability of developed lots, which is really feeding back to legislation that was passed after the last recession, constraining financing for land development. But they've been fighting that, and they're continuing to try to put more houses on the ground, which means kind of in the midterm, as they get more houses on the ground, so that this mortgage boost, right, is kind of a short-term kind of thing. We have this 17% increase in purchasing power, but financing for everybody has gone down. So the cost of building homes is also falling, and we're facing other supply constraints and lumber and other supplies, especially with the little bitty trade spat and we had with China, and also some dislocation that we're having with trade due to COVID. So builders are not only facing land developed lot shortages, but also just inputs across the building home spectrum. And so, but eventually they can build houses, and eventually they will get it out there. And so then that's going to be kind of a key to see what exactly happens when we do start seeing, when our supply constraint is relieved somewhat and we start seeing new houses. Will prices stay as high as they've gotten? And actually, I would say largely yes, because basically what we see in the United States as mortgage rates fall is that average house prices stay the same, but it's because what people do with their increase in purchasing power is they buy bigger houses on larger lots with nicer finishes. And so if you're looking at average or median sales prices, they continue to increase with a little bit above inflation. But if you look at per square foot prices, they're relatively flat. So if you're looking at average and median prices over the midterm, even as the builders put more houses on, finally get more houses into this market, I would expect the average and median prices to stay relatively flat. And but we're going to see larger houses with nicer finishes, and people are going to be doing that with their refinancing, improving their houses. Right. I mean, right now, if you have a house already, and then all of a sudden you can lower your monthly payment by $100, $200, $300, right? And you have that saving, they have that essentially additional savings. You can plow that back into your house and improve your living space, or you can do all other kinds of things with that money. So, but anyway, so that basically summarizes our, that's what's happened in 2020 and why. And so then follows here is going to be our forecast. Now, forecasting, I am a microeconomist. I look at what determines house prices in individual markets and individual neighborhoods, and I look at the shape of city, right? So like all my dissertation was about where employment centers are in the city of Houston, and people commuting back and forth, and then how that determines land prices and house prices and stuff like that. And that's actually relatively easy compared to macroeconomics, right? To some extent, when we have these macroeconomic forecasts, unless you really can see something coming up in the next 2 or 3 months, you kind of have to look back at what's happened every other time. We've hit a low and we've started recovering. And what happens is, basically we slowly grow until we get back to our old trend line. And and if you could actually foresee the next economic catastrophe, so would the Fed, and they would respond, and so would the federal government, and they would respond, and hopefully try to prevent it. Or you can make a lot of money if you can keep it secret to yourself. And so basically, the forecast underlying the broad economic forecast underlying our forecast for real estate is the vaccine rollout continues apace, and there is going to be no further economic catastrophe. We're going to start seeing employment continue, or we're going to continue to see employment recover, just as if we were coming out of a more typical recession. But like I've already told you, no recession is really typical, and this is more more atypical than any recent recession. Um, but anyway, so just with that caveat, this is what we're expecting to see, right? So, like across the state of Texas, we saw housing permits this year grew 20% year over year, right? And that's actually along the line. We saw a little boost at the end of the year from builders, if we zoom in on that. But it was actually kind of what we were forecasting. We were forecasting pretty good growth for permit for this year anyway. That's going to fall a little bit in 2021, mainly because we've already seen so much growth in 2020, right? So the growth rate is going to fall. And 15% is still an incredibly high growth rate in permit. And then over the long, over the mid, so then we'll get these houses and we'll satisfy this increase in demand from higher mortgage rates. And then it'll slowly fall back to more typical trends relative that's more related to our demographics, our employment growth, our income growth, and et cetera, which is more expectation of around 5-6% per year increase in demand for single family homes. The other key thing, right? You can see, like, if we look at Houston, a lot of the growth in 2021, while still being positive in Houston, is going to fall further between 2020 and 2021. And this is an artifact of, the oil and gas industry going to still be weak and impacting Houston more than the rest of the state of Texas and the other major metros. I'll go ahead and say this, I missed it earlier. Oil and gas, we never really recovered from the 2014 bust, and the state of Texas and Houston did fine, was doing great. Eventually, as soon as people start flying again and start driving to see grandma again, oil is probably going to recover to $45, $50 a gallon, which is a barrel, sorry, maybe a little bit higher, but it's really just going to be enough to get just enough rigs back out in West Texas to continue to see increases in the United States of about 1 million barrels per year. And what we saw in Houston and Texas in the oil and gas industry in the last two little mini busts for oil and gas, that was we never really needed to return to the same absolute levels of rigs and or employment in the oil and gas industry in order to maintain that 1 million barrels per year. So oil is continuing to not be as big of an industry, a smaller and smaller industry in a relative sense in the state of Texas and in Houston. And so we continue to see growth in trade and in all of our other industries in Houston and in Texas. Vacancy rates in apartments, we're expecting that to continue to tick up this year. People are, right, moratoriums are ending. A lot of, and a lot of that is just delaying the pain up until we see real recoveries in these industries that support the apartment markets. And so vacancy rates are probably going to tick up again in 2021. Effective rents are going to generally tick down still across Texas, and especially for Class A spaces. What we generally see, the market as a whole often performs a little bit better than Class A because people move down. Oops, I didn't title this one, sorry for that. But this is office again, right? We're still shaking out. So office market, right? They typically have much longer leases, measured in years instead of months, and so it takes a little bit longer for everything to shake out. We saw rapid increases in 2020 due to bankruptcies, and in 20 and some firms just had their leases rolling over. 2021, there may still be some more bankruptcies forthcoming in our corporate sector, but also leases and people right-sizing like especially temporarily, you can always get more space. So if your lease is rolling over in 2021 and you're still currently in work from home mode, you're probably going to go ahead and try to get a little bit less square footage, and just go ahead and cross your fingers that if it ends up you need more, there's still some available, which it looks like there will be. And so we're going to see offices continue to tick up on their vacancy across the state of Texas. Retail, this is actually retail. So I'm not here at the real estate center. I'm not the commercial guy. I was at the Institute for Regional Forecasting, just focusing on Houston. And in Houston alone, retail has been struggling incredibly. No new retail was being built in Houston at all, except for out there around our third loop road, the Grand Parkway, which is just basically HEBs and nail salons chasing at rooftops. And as part of this, right, a lot like what I said about the virtual stuff in your industry, a lot of people have really switched over to, there's been a large movement from physical retail towards online retail, and it's not going to stay. I can't give you any real numbers on how much of that switch has been, but it's not going to stay that big of a number. But we're probably not going to switch back as all the way to where we were in 2019. And so retail is generally going to continue to struggle. A lot of older spaces are no longer going to be as useful as a lot of people are going to have now become familiar with online shopping and will continue that, not at the same rate that they have. But sorry, I got a little bit of crick in my throat. But we will still see some struggle through 2021 for retail. So that concludes the presentation I have prepared for you all today. I wanted to go ahead and let you know, for your own purposes, we have a lot of this data that you've seen today is actually available on our website for your specific metropolitan, for your specific market. You can look it up for your county, even for your boards. You can look it up by the neighborhoods or whatever the local areas that you particularly end up focused in. And then we also provide a lot of this economic data that you've seen today. But there's two other resources. So I pulled a couple of my charts from FRED, which is I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's the Federal Reserve or something something. And it's the St. Louis Federal Reserve branch puts it out for us. And so that's what I always Google, Federal Reserve St. Louis FRED, and it gets me straight to them. And so they provide, and they just provide just the raw data. And then, besides following us on Facebook and LinkedIn and all this other stuff, where we'll give you our monthly, quarterly, annual reports and stuff like that, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas also does the same thing, and they're an excellent resource also to keep your pulse on what's going on in the state of Texas and in your regions as well. And then even your own MLS and your local realtor board, they're excellent sources of information. I'm only really familiar with Houston area realtors, and they provided me with some great data while I was working in Houston. But just so you know, you don't have to wait for January and August to see a lot of stuff that's going on. We put this out all the time. But
Dr. Perdue, thank you so much. This has been very, very, very helpful. And I know all of us watching today are thinking, yes, Dr. Perdue has his arms around the economics of our major metros in Texas. I want to say that my favorite slides, if you want to write these down, all of our students, Slide 13, 16, 20, 23, 25, 26. They will help you so much with your listing presentations and talking with buyers. And what a treat. Welcome again to the Research Center. We just absolutely can tell that we're going to get a lot of great information from Dr. Perdue over these years. As some of you know, we also have a mid-year economic update in August. I hope Dr. Adam Perdue will be able to join us at that time. I loved how once you got into your slides and PowerPoint, you could just see the economists coming out in your face. You were just all, I want to say, excited. You just had so much enthusiasm for what you were talking about. At the end of the month, I have 2 interviewees I'm so excited to interview. The title on January the 28th is Please Meet My Real Estate Family. My daughter, Kelly Shear, practices real estate in the Woodlands, the North Houston area. My son-in-law, Kevin Didelowitz, practices real estate in the Georgetown, Liberty Hill area, as well as in Frisco, Plano. It's going to be so much fun to have my 2 wonderful family members that are in real estate that I can interview, and also to be able to call them successful superstars in real estate. As our students and customers know, every month I do 2 superstars around the state. Real estate, loan, as well as commercial agents and inspectors and appraisers, and what they have to say we bring down into our books. Wonderful, encouraging, inspirational ideas on how to improve your business in 2021. You can go to our website. You can get both books for $25 and $14.95 each. Those most definitely you can buy in our front offices of our brick and mortar campuses. Then I want to say tomorrow morning, I'm doing a goal setting business model development breakfast talk for the Houston Association of Realtors in the north part of our city, and it will be on Zoom. So if you have an interest in that, just email me and I'll send you the Zoom link, rita@championschool.com. Thank you for your business. Thank you for choosing Champions School of Real Estate. Go to the Real Estate Center website, pull down these fantastic slides and PowerPoint that Dr. Adam Perdue gave us today. Good luck to you, Dr. Perdue. I know you're in Collin County soon doing an economic update. And then you'll be at the American Association of Real Estate Asian Association in the Houston area doing this economic update. We so appreciate the Research Center. We so appreciate our customers, our students. Have a wonderful kickoff to the new year. Everything Dr. Perdue said says we're in great shape. We're going to continue to have sales. And aren't we just so darn happy that we live in the state of Texas? So thank you. I'm Rita Santamaria, owner, founder of Champions School of Real Estate. And I truly appreciate your choosing to be a champion. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.